On my 68th birthday, I woke up in the guest room of my own house. There was no card, no flowers. The coffee pot had already gone cold by the time I stepped into the kitchen. And the only sounds were the dishwasher humming and my daughter-in-law laughing on the phone. No one said happy birthday. Not even a nod. That was the morning I knew they had quietly moved on from me, and I was now just another piece of furniture. Background, I'm Evelyn March, 68, and that was the moment I knew. My time had quietly expired in their eyes. Not with cruelty, but with the sort of silence that settles when people stop seeing you as necessary. Subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Thanks. They'd moved in 3 years prior. After my son lost his job, he'd asked gently, sheepishly, if they could stay for a little while just until we get back on our feet. Mom? At the time, I was proud to be needed. The house built in '82 with warm cedar siding and the big bay window in the den had felt too quiet since Harold passed. I told them to make it theirs, and they did. They painted the walls white, took down the framed needlepoints I'd stitched. In my 30s, swapped the floral couch for a sleek gray sectional I never quite understood. The bedroom that used to be mine became theirs. I moved down the hall into the small room where I once kept my sewing machine. No one asked if I was comfortable. I told myself it was only temporary. But temporary has a way of becoming forever when you stop asserting that you exist. I started making excuses for their forgetting. She works long hours. He's under pressure. The kids are going through a phase. Maybe they just need more time. My birthday fell on a Tuesday that year. I sat in the kitchen with my toast, listening to my grandson argue with his mother about screen time. No one looked at me. I took out the trash. I folded their laundry. I refilled the bird feeder because no one else remembered the finches, like I did. They used to love sitting with me on the porch watching them swoop in for seeds. Now the porch was crowded with bikes and yoga mats. That night, I lay in bed, listening to the distant sound of Netflix echo down the hall, and I remembered my 42nd birthday. I'd spent the whole day baking a caramel cake because it was his favorite. My son's. The icing hadn't set right, and I cried in the bathroom because I thought I'd ruined it. But he'd hugged me and said, "This is perfect. Mom always is." Funny how you can still feel the ghost of that hug even when the boy who gave it doesn't see you anymore. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just lay there, wrapped in my old robe, and felt something inside me cool to stillness, like the last ember in a fire finally giving out. Not anger, not heartbreak, just the clarity of being finished. The next morning, I made breakfast like I always did. Bacon, scrambled eggs, the toast just how the kids liked it. I packed their lunches. I smiled. I asked them about their tests and dance recitals. I complimented her new earrings. I wrote the grocery list and folded the hand towels. I was a ghost with warm hands. That was all. What no one saw was the envelope tucked in my handbag. A quiet document I'd printed the night before at the library. Not a lawyer's notice, just a timeline, dates, a list of reminders. A soft push. 90 days. That's what I gave them. Not out of spite, not even out of pain. It's just because I needed to remember I existed. That this house, with its creaking floors and peeling paint, was mine. That I mattered enough to reclaim space. They didn't believe me at first. Thought it was a joke. My son laughed gently, said, "Come on, Mom, what's this about?" But I didn't raise my voice. Just looked at him and said, "It's time." I didn't say more, 'cause sometimes silence is louder than pleading. The guest room is quiet now, but not in the lonely way it was that birthday morning. The walls have my old paintings again. The Afghan I crocheted in '95s rests on the bed. And every morning, the coffee is just as I like it. Hot, strong, and mine. I don't know what he tells people now. Maybe that his mother had a breakdown. Maybe that she got mean with age. People always need a story to make sense of the parts they don't want to own. But the truth is simpler than that. I just got tired of sleeping in a house where my name had been erased. I sent them a quiet eviction notice. And this time, I kept the master key. I never expected medals. I never wanted grand gestures or shiny plaques engraved with "World's Best Mom." That's not why you do the work. You do it because there are small mouths to feed, runny noses to wipe, and a kind of love that folds itself into chores and calendars and casseroles. That kind of love doesn't need to be seen. It just needs to be lived. And I did, for decades. I was 24 when I had Daniel. My mother warned me it would change everything. She was right. I stopped playing piano after. He was born, sold the upright for rent. I started making lists instead: formula, wipes, bills, milk, sleep when you can. By the time he was 2, I could change a diaper with one hand and soothe the fever with the other. I never resented it. It just became the rhythm of life. Harold and I scraped by in the early years. He worked nights at the factory. I took in alterations, made birthday cakes for neighbors, even cleaned houses on weekends. There was one summer, 81, I think, when the air conditioner broke and we all slept on the porch to stay cool. We made a game out of it, like camping. Daniel loved it. He said the crickets were singing just for him. When our second child, Leela, came along, things didn't get easier. They just got fuller. More plates spinning, more socks missing their mates. But we had routines: Sunday pancakes, Friday night movies, story time under patchwork quilts. I'd sew their Halloween costumes late into the night, even when my eyes blurred and my back ached. I remember once Daniel wanted to be a lion. I hand-stitched every strand of yarn on that mane. He won first place in the school parade. He doesn't remember that. But I do. It's strange, the things you hold on to. It's a pair of mittens I kept in the glove compartment in case they forgot theirs. The dentist appointments I rescheduled 3 times because of Lila's dance recitals. The birthday parties where I baked cupcakes for every classmate because I didn't want any child to feel left out. I was the keeper of the little things. The don't forgets, the be safes, the extra napkins, the emergency snack bags. When Daniel had his first heartbreak at 17, I didn't say much. Just brought him soup and let him cry into the sleeves of my sweater. I think that's when I realized that love isn't in what you say. It's in being there without asking to be seen. When Harold got sick in 2009, everything slowed down. I gave up my part-time job at the library to care for him full-time. I managed his medications, changed his dressings, kept a log of every change in his breathing. It was just the 2 of us again, older, quieter, weathered. He passed in the spring of 2011 on a Tuesday morning while the house smelled of cinnamon and rain. After the funeral, Daniel and Lila were there for a little while. They stayed the weekend. She brought daffodils. He fixed the leaky faucet. We sat around the dining table and it almost felt like before. But then life pulled them back, as it does, and the house settled into a different kind of silence. I learned to live with it. I made peace with solitude, till of course they needed a place to land. When Daniel called in 2020, there was no hesitation in my voice. Of course, I said. Bring the kids, bring the dog, stay as long as you need. And I meant it. I moved my photo albums to the attic to make room for their coats. I gave up the den so they could set up a home office. I bought almond milk even though I don't drink it. And I learned how to use the new thermostat they installed without being asked. There's a kind of forgetting that happens gradually. It's not cruel, it's just busy. You go from being needed for everything to being in the way. I used to cut the crusts off their sandwiches. Now I had to ask permission to turn down the thermostat. I tried to stay useful. I became their morning barista, their afternoon school pickup, the backup babysitter. I refilled the dog's water when no one else remembered. I kept the pantry stocked. I pretended not to notice when they rolled their eyes at my stories. Lila visited once during that time. She stayed for 2 nights. I made her favorite pot roast with rosemary and garlic, but she said she was vegan now. She scrolled on her phone during dinner and left early the next morning, citing a meeting. I understood. People change. But I watched her take the hand throne. Mug I'd made her in a pottery class back in '98 and placed it in the donate pile without a glance. I pulled it out later, rinsed it clean, and put it on the top shelf. Some things are too full of memory to give away. I was generous, but I was never asked if I wanted to be. My giving was assumed. And I gave until there was very little left to offer. It wasn't just about space. It was about presence. About becoming invisible in a house I built with my own hands, where I once patched drywall and painted over crayon marks. They started hosting dinner parties without telling me. I'd hear laughter downstairs while I stayed upstairs folding towels. Once someone asked who lives here again. And my daughter-in-law said, "Oh, just Daniel's mom. She's sweet." Just Daniel's mom. She's sweet. I remember whispering those words to myself later that night as if trying them on. I didn't recognize the woman they described. She sounded small, and I had never been small. I began waking earlier. It was the only time the house felt like mine again. Before the noise, before the rush. I'd sit in the kitchen with my black coffee, staring at the framed photograph on the fridge, Daniel in Little League, his front tooth missing, grinning like he'd just won the world. That picture had faded, but I hadn't. Not really. I was still here, but no one seemed to notice. It's hard to say exactly when I started keeping score. Not in bitterness, just in awareness. Another missed birthday. Another weekend they were. Too busy, another time the groceries I bought were left untouched. I stopped mentioning the lavender I planted by the walkway, stopped pointing out the birds returning to the feeder, stopped asking if they wanted to go for walks. Somehow, over time, they had taught me that my voice was optional. Still, I stayed. Because that's what mothers do, isn't it? We stay until we've become part of the wallpaper, only noticed when we're gone. But the silence had started. Speaking back, it said, "You've done enough." And I was beginning to believe it. It didn't break all at once. It wore down like stone beneath a slow, unyielding drip. And every drop had a name, a glance missed. A room gone quiet when I entered a thank you that never came. I suppose that's how people disappear. Not through one great act of erasure, but through 100 small ones. The first time I felt it, truly felt it, was a Tuesday evening in early spring. The house was full of noise, the television, the dishwasher, the muffled tapping of a Zoom call. I had made stew, my mother's recipe, the one with paprika and cloves, that always filled the kitchen with warmth. I set the table, laid out napkins, and called them down for dinner. No one came. 20 minutes passed, then 30. When they finally sat, Daniel picked at his bowl and said nothing. His wife took one bite, pushed it away, and said she wasn't that hungry. The children asked for cereal instead. That night, I scraped untouched stew into the trash and listened to the garbage disposal grind down what was once comfort into noise. That was hurt number one. There were others. I remember when the grandkids had a school recital choir. I think it was they printed out invitations, mailed them to friends, even posted about it online. I only found out the morning of, when I saw them dressing up. I asked if I should come. My grandson looked up at me with confusion and said, "You don't really go to things like that, do you?" I stayed home that evening, folded towels, and watched the sun stretch long across the porch like it was trying to reach me. The towels were always folded. I became the silent rhythm of that house, predictable, invisible, convenient. My coffee cup always in the same cupboard, my shoes tucked neatly beside the door. I learned to stop making noise. When the kids left their wrappers on the counter, I cleaned them without comment. When the dog tore through my garden again, I replanted the daffodils without a word. I learned not to take up space. Once, I tried to bring up my doctor's appointment. I'd been having those dizzy spells again, the ones that made the room shift like a boat in water. I mentioned it at breakfast, gently, while slicing apples for the kids, but no one heard me. Or maybe they did and they just didn't know how to respond. Either way, the moment passed. I saw to the appointment myself. There's something soul-bruising about being unneeded in a place you once built with your own hands. They started locking the bathroom door during the day. Not just the one in their room, but the hallway one too. I asked once if something was wrong with the handle. She smiled politely and said, "It's just habit. I've been working from home. We need privacy." I understood privacy. The new currency of a house that had forgotten its keeper. Once a package arrived for me. A small box, something I had ordered online, a new set of knitting needles to replace the ones I'd lost during the move. When I opened the front door to retrieve it, it was gone. Later that day, I found the open box in the garage, the contents half scattered. One of the children had used the needles for a school project. No one had asked. No one returned them. It wasn't the needles, it was the absence of asking. They had started making decisions about the house without me. Renovations, paint colors, even moving furniture. The rug in the living room was rolled up and replaced with a modern industrial piece that didn't catch the light the way the old one had. They said it was easier to clean. I said nothing. Later, I traced my hand across the hardwood where the sun no longer warmed it and missed the way the old rug softened my steps. 100 quiet hurts. I didn't keep a list. Not in writing. But the mind has a way of recording what the heart won't let go of. The missed birthdays, forgotten holidays. One Christmas, I baked gingerbread from scratch, wrapped small gifts for each of them, things I'd chosen with care, things I'd saved for. A scarf in her favorite color. A rare book for Daniel. The children unwrapped theirs and moved on quickly. No one asked about mine. No one wondered if I had a gift waiting under the tree. I did, but I left it in my room. It's strange. You never imagine becoming a footnote in your own home. You think the sacrifices, the late nights, the tears held, enduring flu seasons and parent-teacher meetings and car troubles, they must accumulate somewhere, like equity, like love. But it turns out that love, when not nourished, becomes forgettable, disposable. I started walking in the evenings, just around the block, the same loop. Past the oak tree that still had the initials H+E carved into. The bark past the house with the blue shutters where Mrs. Navarro always tended her roses, even after her eyesight faded. We used to wave. Now we mostly nodded. I think she knew the weight I carried, even if we never spoke of it. One day, as I turned the corner back onto our street, I saw them, Daniel and his wife, pulling into the driveway, the trunk full of shopping bags. They hadn't told me they were going out. I didn't expect them to. But as they laughed about, something I couldn't hear, her hand brushing his, I felt the weight of a truth settle in. They were a unit. I was the extra. I stopped asking them to join me for dinner. I stopped waiting for a thank you. I still did things I'm not. Cruel, I kept the house in rhythm because rhythm is its own form of comfort. But I stopped folding his socks just right. I stopped reminding her about trash day. I stopped buying almond milk. One morning, I found a note on the fridge. Running late, didn't have time to pack lunches. I stared at it for a long time. Then I made myself a quiet breakfast and let the note stay there, just that once. The next week, the Wi-Fi password was changed. I had to ask for it. She handed it over with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "We just needed to reset it," she said. I thanked her and took it, but I wondered briefly if they had meant to leave me out. It's the accumulation, that's what does it. The betrayal doesn't arrive on horseback, it arrives in crumbs. In sideways glances, in not being asked what you think of the new hallway light. It arrives when you realize the children no longer look for you when they get home, when your name isn't on the emergency contact list. When the dog now sleeps in what was once your reading chair, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I'm not sure I had the strength left to make noise. But I began to see that this quiet I was living in wasn't peace, it was erasure. And slowly, without drama, I began to consider what life could look like if I chose not to be the extra anymore. It happened on a Monday, just after lunch. Sky was flat and gray, the kind of overcast. That makes the whole day feel suspended. I had just come back from the pharmacy where I'd picked up my prescriptions and a new bottle of liniment for my knees. I'd taken to walking a little slower lately. The bones make their complaints known in ways you can't ignore after 60. 5. I came through the side door quietly, as I often did, not wanting to interrupt anything important. There were voices in the living room, Daniel's low, measured tone and her sharper one, clipped at the edges. The way she sounded when she was trying to make a point without appearing unkind. I paused just behind the wall, not out of malice, but instinct. When you've spent your life reading a house, you can tell when it's humming wrong. She won't even notice, she said, in a voice meant to be calm. Honestly, she doesn't need it anymore. Do you know that? She'd notice eventually, he replied, a sigh behind his words. But maybe by then it won't matter. The silence that followed wasn't just pause. It was agreement. Finality, I walked into the kitchen and placed the pharmacy bag on the counter with a deliberate kind of grace. It's the way you do when you want to make your presence known without saying a word. The voices stopped. A beat passed. Then footsteps, and the air shifted back into its usual performance of normalcy. They didn't say what it was about, not then. But I felt the chill of it long after the sun went down. 2 days later, I found the envelope. It was on the desk. In Daniel's office, the one that used to be Harold's study before it was overtaken by wires and monitors and productivity software. I'd gone in to dust. I still did that. Still cared for the rooms I wasn't welcome in. And that's when I saw it, an envelope marked refinance application. My name was listed at the top. Not Daniel's, not hers. Mine. I opened it with trembling hands. What I saw made the room tilt. They had used my name, my credit, my house as collateral. They were refinancing the mortgage on a home that was already paid off. The documents were nearly complete. Digital signatures marked in boxes, and mine was there too. Only I had never signed a thing. I sat down, slowly, on the edge of the chair, my knees stiff, the liniment still unopened in its plastic bag across the hall. My heart didn't race. It just quieted. That same silence from the stew, from the gingerbread, from the recital. It was back, and this time it came with legal weight. I remembered the last time I'd signed anything official. A year prior, maybe more. Some form for insurance. I couldn't be sure. But this wasn't just an oversight. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was theft, just dressed in family clothes. I didn't confront them, not right away. I spent that evening as I always did. I made tea. I took out the trash. I read 3 pages of a novel I no longer cared to finish. I watched the shadows shift on the walls and thought about my father's hands, how steady they were when he taught. Me, how to sign my name for the first time? That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed listening to the familiar creaks of the house, the ones that had never betrayed me. I thought about Harold, about how he would have handled this. He would have stormed down the hall, raised his voice, demanded answers. But I had no appetite for noise. My strength lived in stillness. The next morning, I printed the documents. I took them to the bank first, just to confirm what I already knew. The notary looked at me, her eyes kind, and said softly, "Ma'am, this signature. It doesn't match. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud, but it was truth. It's paper thin and heavy as stone." I went home and placed the documents in a drawer. I made a cup of coffee and stood by the window watching the children play in the yard. They didn't know. Of course not. They were just children. I smiled faintly at the way the youngest one ran with her arms out like wings. That afternoon, I spoke to a lawyer, a woman named Clarissa. She didn't speak down to me. She listened. Truly listened, and told me what I already feared. What they'd done could be prosecuted. "But it'll tear your family," she warned gently. I told her it had already torn. That evening, I called Daniel into the kitchen. Just him. Chuas. Out. I laid the papers down on the table and looked him in the eyes. I didn't ask questions. I didn't accuse. I just said you used my name. He sat down, the weight of it catching up to him all at once. He looked tired, older than I remembered. It was just to get us through a rough patch, he said. We didn't think you'd understand. We're going to tell you soon. But soon never comes when people are counting on your silence. I told him I needed time to think. He nodded. I saw the boy in him again for a moment, the one who used to cry when he scraped his knees. Oh, but I wasn't his soft landing anymore. That weekend, I didn't cook. I didn't sweep. I didn't wash their clothes or answer the door when the neighbor came by to borrow sugar. I was still there, but I'd pulled my spirit back like a tide. And in that absence, the air got heavier. They started asking questions. Was I all right? Did I need something? Was I mad? I told them nothing, because the final line had been crossed. Not with words, but with action. With a document forged in assumption and entitlement. With a signature that did not belong to them, but that they used anyway because they thought I wouldn't notice, or wouldn't fight back. But I did notice. I was no longer interested in keeping the peace at the cost of my personhood. The final line wasn't about money. It was about memory, about everything I had poured into a life that now saw me as a resource, not a mother. Not Evelyn, just a signature, just a name on a deed. I stood in that kitchen, the place where I'd once taught Daniel how to stir gravy without lumps. And I looked at the papers again, not with tears, not with rage, just with resolve. It was time to start moving differently. And I would, quietly, deliberately, because if they could cross that line without asking, then I could draw one of my own. After the papers, I stopped talking the way I used to. Not completely. I still said good morning in dinners. Reddy still reminded the kids to put their shoes away. Still asked if anyone needed anything when I went to the store. But my voice didn't reach the same way. I spoke without offering, without layering warmth, without hoping to be heard. I suppose I began to speak the way they listened minimally. Daniel didn't ask about the documents again. Kami, he thought. The moment had passed that the paper had drifted into the pile of unspoken things mothers are supposed to forgive. But I had stopped collecting those kinds of things. There was nowhere left to store them. Silence, I learned, is its own kind of boundary. Not a punishment, not even a withdrawal. It's just a decision not to participate in the pretending anymore. I didn't tell them I had hired Clarissa, that I'd begun quietly reviewing every legal detail tied to the house, every old deed, every updated insurance form, every document that had my name but not my permission. It became my private project, something to hold on to. A kind of reclamation I didn't even realize I needed. I'd go to the library 3 mornings a week under the pretense of errands. I'd sit at the computer and read, not just legal forms, books, articles, stories about women who reached a point in their lives where silence stopped being something forced and started being something chosen. I stopped offering rides to the grandkids, stopped packing the school snacks, stopped anticipating their needs before they said them. At first, no one noticed. Then the shifts began. They'd forget something. I wouldn't remind them. They'd ask, "Did you get the almond milk?" And I'd simply say, "No, I didn't know we needed it. It wasn't cold, just flat." A reflection of how they'd treated my warmth, like wallpaper always there, unnoticed until gone. I didn't remove myself from the house. Not physically, but I stopped being its heartbeat. I let the rhythm slip into their hands, and they stumbled with it, though they tried not to show it. The garden started to brown. The dishwasher overflowed. Once the bills came late. Nothing disastrous, but noticeable. I took up small routines for myself, quiet ones. I started journaling in the evenings. I bought a small notebook, soft blue leather, with thick paper that made a sound when the pen moved across it. I wrote without apology, not for anyone to read. Just to put my life back in a place I could see. In one entry, I wrote, "I am not an afterthought. I am not a signature. Some mornings I'd sit by the window with my coffee and watch the way the light moved across the floorboards. The sun didn't care who noticed it. It just arrived. One day I went to the bank alone and opened a separate account. I didn't need much, just a place that was mine. I'd been setting a little aside for years, even after Harold passed. Grocery change, birthday money I was never asked about, a refund from a coat I returned because no one complimented it. I had always saved quietly. Now I saved with intention. I kept the papers in a folder hidden behind the old linens in my closet. The documents from the refinance, the bank records, even the notes from Clarissa. Not because I was afraid they'd find them, but because they no longer deserved to know where I kept the truth. One evening, Daniel asked if I was okay. It had been weeks since our quiet confrontation in the kitchen. We hadn't spoken of it since. I looked at him and said, "I'm fine." That was all. He lingered, waiting for something more. But I didn't offer it. I stirred my tea and returned to the crossword puzzle I hadn't actually touched in months. The questions were familiar. The answers didn't matter. What surprised me wasn't how easy the silence became, but how comfortable it felt. There was peace in not explaining myself. I stopped justifying my choices. If I didn't feel like making dinner, I didn't. If I wanted to walk at twilight instead of 5, I did. If the towel stayed unfolded, so be it. They started adjusting. The house shifted again. I watched it happen. Her voice got tighter. She asked more questions. "Are you feeling okay? Do you need help with anything? Have you been sleeping well?" I nodded, always politely. But I said less than I used to. There's something unsettling about a woman who doesn't offer up her feelings like an open pantry. The grandkids noticed too. The youngest began sitting next to me again, curling up beside me on the couch without saying anything. Children can feel the difference before they can name it. She didn't ask me to tell stories like before. She just leaned her head on my shoulder and stayed. I didn't break the silence. I let it be a place we both belonged. One day, I found a card slipped under my door. It was from her, my daughter-in-law, a thank you card. Blank inside, except for one line. "We appreciate everything you've done." No signature, no mention of what had been done to me. Just a vague, uneasy gratitude. I placed it in the drawer with the legal papers, not out of malice, just to keep the truth company. I went silent and they started hearing themselves more clearly. The absence of my voice made space for their echoes. And I think, slowly, they began to realize how much of the house's peace had been held up by the woman they'd stopped seeing. There's a weight to silence that noise can't compete with. It didn't happen all at once, but the balance began to shift. They became a little more careful, a little more deliberate. But by then, it wasn't about them anymore. It was about me. I had stopped hoping they'd understand. I no longer needed them to. I was gathering myself back, not loudly, not with fireworks. Just thread by thread, like mending a quilt, quiet work, soulful work. I made an appointment with Clarissa for a follow-up. I wanted to understand my full rights, not just as a homeowner, but as a woman who had built a life, given it freely, and was now ready to reclaim it. That day, I wore a deep green coat I hadn't put on since Harold's funeral. It still smelled faintly of cedar and memory. As I walked into the office, Clarissa looked up and smiled. She asked how I was doing. I told her simply, "I'm ready." I meant it. Silence had done its work. It had cleared the noise, and now I could finally hear myself again. I didn't storm out. I didn't make declarations. Didn't sit them all down for some grand reckoning over tea. That was never my way. And truthfully, by the time I made the decision, I no longer needed an apology to justify it. My change didn't come like thunder. It came like early morning frost, quiet, certain, irreversible. The first thing I did was buy a small fireproof box from the hardware store. I carried it home in a paper bag and tucked it beneath my bed. Inside, I placed every document that mattered: the deed, the refinance records, A letter from Clarissa outlining my rights, my new bank account details, even the spare key. I called it my quiet box. It was the one thing in that house that no one else touched. Then I set about reclaiming my name in small, deliberate acts. I updated the utilities to list me solely as the primary. I changed the password on the Wi-Fi. I started receiving the mail at the front door again, not the side slot they used as if I were just another tenant. Daniel noticed the change. So did she. There was confusion at first, a kind of hesitant politeness, layered over quiet tension. They'd ask questions they never used to. Did you switch the internet plan? Do you know where the tax file went? I'd answer with calm, pointed brevity. Yes, I did. Or, it's in my files. No apologies, no explanations. My silence had paved the way, and now my voice returned, not loud but precise. I took back the master bedroom next. That happened one Saturday morning while they were out at the grocery store. I'd been sleeping in the guest room for nearly 3 years. The mattress had dipped in the center. My knees ached when I got out of bed, and I realized in a sudden and steady way that I had every right to sleep where I was most comfortable. I packed their things quietly, folded everything, left nothing disheveled. I moved their belongings into the guest room and placed a note on the nightstand. I'll be taking my room back. It'll be fine in here. I didn't wait for a reaction. By the time they returned, I had already arranged the room the way it used to be: my books on the shelf, my quilt folded at the foot of the bed, the photograph of Harold and me young, sun-drenched, laughing, restored to the nightstand. They didn't bring it up that night. Suppose they didn't know how. But the air in the hallway shifted. There was a new respect in the way they knocked before entering, a hesitation in their footsteps. They had walked into my home for years. Without seeing me, now for the first time in a long while, they weren't sure what I might do next. I liked that feeling. Not because it gave me power over them, but because it reminded me that I still had choices. Clarissa and I met again 2 weeks later. She asked if I wanted to pursue legal action, but I told her no. It wasn't about courtrooms. Didn't want to ruin anyone's future. I just wanted my boundaries returned, the lines redrawn with dignity. Instead, we drafted an agreement, a formal one, clear terms. They could remain in the house for 90 days. After that, they would need to find a place of their own. I would no longer subsidize their lives with silence. We sent the papers certified. I could have handed them over myself, but it was better this way: clean, professional, undeniable. The envelope arrived on a Thursday. I watched from the porch. As Daniel opened it, I couldn't see his face from where I stood, but I imagined it folding with shock. I didn't flinch. I kept sipping my tea. That evening, there was finally a conversation. He asked me why. I told him the truth, because I deserved to live in my own home with peace. He opened his mouth, maybe to argue, maybe to apologize. But I held up my hand gently, the way I used to when he was a boy and couldn't stop talking at the dinner table. I'm not angry, I said, but I am finished, and I was. After that, I moved differently in every room. I started eating what I wanted, when I wanted. I stopped trying to coordinate dinner times. I bought fresh peonies for the kitchen table and painted the laundry room the same sunflower yellow I'd always wanted. I moved the framed needle points back into the hallway. I even dusted off the old upright piano borrowed from a neighbor. Not the same one I'd sold, but close, and played a few rusty bars. My fingers still remembered the way. For the first time in years, I heard music in my house that came from me. In the weeks that followed, I began preparing for the shift. I cleared out closets, donated old coats, reorganized drawers. The act of reclaiming space became sacred. Every towel folded, every shelf dusted, every corner swept felt like a return to myself. The children noticed. The youngest began watching. Me again, her eyes curious, searching. One day she asked, "Why are you changing everything?" I smiled. Because it's mine. She didn't ask what I meant. But I think she understood more than the adults ever could. 90 days. That's what I'd given them. It wasn't punishment, it was clarity. A boundary drawn not in anger, but in finality. They didn't fight it. They looked for apartments. They whispered behind closed doors. Some evenings I heard the hum of strained conversations, the kind where words are measured and futures negotiated. But I stayed out of it. Their choices were no longer mine to solve. I helped with the kids when asked. I offered kindness, but never obligation. By day 50, the tension had softened. By day 70, the boxes had begun to stack by the door. I walked past them without comment. They packed their things the way they had unpacked them, without asking, without fanfare. On the last morning, Daniel stood by the front door, holding the keys I'd given them years ago. He looked at me the way a man does when he finally sees the cost of something. He handed them back without a word. I took them gently, placed them in the drawer next to the quiet box, and closed it. After they left, I walked through the house alone. The silence was back, but it wasn't heavy now. It was clean, restorative. I opened the windows, let the breeze run through the rooms. I breathed deeply. My breath filled the space like music. I moved differently because I had remembered who I was. Not just a mother, not just a woman who gave, but a woman who remained, a woman who chose. And the house, old and familiar, welcomed me back like it had just been waiting for me to return. The house was quiet again, but not the same kind of quiet I had known before, the one heavy with erasure, where I could walk through a room and feel like dust. This silence was different. It was chosen. It was sacred. The rooms echoed only with my own movements now, and for the first time in years, that felt like peace, not loneliness. I didn't keep tabs on them after they left. I didn't follow where they moved, what kind of place they found, whether it had a yard or enough bedrooms for the children. I didn't ask. I had let go. But life has its own way of looping back, of letting you see things, not out of vengeance, but clarity. The first sign came in the mail. A letter from Daniel, hand-addressed with no return label. The envelope was heavier than a regular letter, and when I opened it, I found a folded note and 2 utility bills, both in his name now, overdue. The note was short. Few lines about adjusting to the new place, how things were tighter than expected, how they missed the routine of the house. I read it twice. Not with triumph, just stillness. They were struggling. Not catastrophically. Not in any way that would make headlines, but in all the small invisible ways that add up. Late payments, short tempers, missed mornings. The infrastructure I'd held together so seamlessly had been removed, and without it, the cracks became visible. I never responded to that first letter. What would I have said? The second sign came through the grapevine. Linda, my neighbor 2 houses down, saw them at the local community center applying for after-school care for the kids. She mentioned it in passing one afternoon while we trimmed our hedges. They seemed tired, she said, squinting against the sun. Not rude, just worn. I nodded. That's all. And I returned to my garden. By month 3, I noticed small things had shifted in how the neighborhood spoke of them. Where they were once the nice young couple staying with Evelyn, they were now just another family trying to find footing. There's a difference. The shine had faded. She stopped posting pictures online. No more carefully staged photos of the kids on the porch, no inspirational captions about family or resilience. Just silence. I imagine they were too busy to curate happiness. Sometimes I wondered how the kids were adjusting, especially the youngest. She used to sit with me while I peeled apples, asking questions with that curious tilt in her voice that only children carry. I missed her, but not enough to reopen the wound. What they lost wasn't just a home. It was me. They lost the woman who remembered birthdays before anyone else, who kept the house stocked with the snacks no one admitted they loved, the woman who knew the difference between silence and distance. and who'd once filled the space between them with unspoken care. They lost the rhythm of steadiness, the sense that someone had their back even when they didn't think to look. Over their shoulder, I didn't wish them harm. I didn't hope they would fall apart. But I couldn't deny what was plain to see. My absence made the difference. You don't know what a foundation holds until you remove it. I started seeing more of myself, not just in the mirror, but in the way the days moved. I took longer walks. I started volunteering at the library again, a few mornings each week. I joined a local book club. I even went to a pottery class one Saturday, where I remade the mug that had once been tossed in the donation bin. This one was stronger, the glaze more deliberate. The life I rebuilt didn't revolve around service, revolved around stillness, presence, and a quiet joy I had almost forgotten was mine to keep. From time to time, I would get small updates. A mutual friend at church mentioned they'd had to sell their second car. Someone else said they were juggling odd jobs, that things hadn't stabilized yet. There was talk of tension, of arguments overheard through two thin walls in their apartment complex. I felt no satisfaction in hearing it, but I did feel seen. Not by them, but by life itself. It was as if the universe had nodded back at me and said, "You mattered more than they ever said." And that was enough. On a breezy Saturday morning in May, I found a drawing tucked into my mailbox, crayon on construction paper. A child's hand, clumsy and sweet, a heart in the middle. No signature, but I recognized the style. The youngest one? I held that paper to my chest for a long time before slipping it into my journal. I didn't mention it to anyone. It was a whisper, not a shout. A soft echo of love that hadn't been. Erased, only buried. That's what they lost to the chance to preserve the good parts. To carry forward what was beautiful about the life we shared, instead of breaking it open for convenience. They traded permanence for control. In doing so, they lost a kind of unconditional warmth that doesn't come twice. I saw Daniel once, outside the pharmacy. We made eye contact. He gave a small wave. I returned it. Nothing more. No need for long conversations. The silence between us had already spoken the full truth. He looked older, less certain. He walked with a slower step. I wondered if he now understood what it meant to be the one who holds everything together, and how much it costs. I went home and sat on the porch with my tea. The wind moved through the wind chimes gently, and the sparrows returned to the feeder. Everything was calm. Everything was whole. They lost the center of the house. It's the one who remembered, who repaired, who kept the soft edges from fraying. They lost the woman who had held the rhythm of their lives in her hands, and now those hands were busy crafting something new. They might find their way again, maybe even build something of their own. I hope they do, but it will never be what we had. Because you cannot rebuild what you never fully honored. And once someone has learned to live without being invisible, they don't go back to fading. They move forward, fully seen. By themselves, if no one else. I didn't write the letter because I needed them to read it. I wrote it because I needed to hear myself. It had been nearly 4 months since they'd left the house. The air inside was cleaner now. It smelled of lemon oil and the faint lavender. Sachets I kept in the linen closet. The house had settled, like me, at peace with its own quiet. One afternoon, after folding laundry and listening to a bit of radio, I opened the drawer where I kept the quiet box. The documents were still there, untouched, all in neat rows. Next to them was the crayon heart, the child's drawing I had tucked away like a pressed flower. I took it out, ran my fingers over the edges, and sat down at the kitchen table with a pen. The letter came out slow, not planned, not edited, steady and true, like a river that had waited long enough. It was addressed to myself, not the self I was now, the version I had abandoned for too long, the woman who lived on autopilot, who folded towels with love no one noticed, who refilled cereal bowls without being thanked, who swallowed too many quiet hurts and called them strength. "Dear Evelyn," I began, "you have been good. You have been kind. You have held this family in your hands for so long you forgot what they felt like when they were empty. You did not ask for much. You only wanted to be seen, to be included, to be cherished, not just needed. And when they didn't offer those things, you stayed anyway. You stayed when they walked past you. You stayed when they used your name for things you never agreed to. You stayed when your room became theirs, when your things disappeared one by one, when your voice was reduced to a whisper in a house you built. You stayed because you believed that love would eventually circle back. You stayed because you thought they'd remember. I paused. My hand trembled slightly, not from sadness, from release. I continued. But they didn't remember Evelyn, not the way you needed. And when you finally drew the line, when you pulled your silence around you like a cloak and stopped, giving what they no longer appreciated, you didn't do it in anger. You did it in clarity. You said, "I will not be erased." And you weren't. You reclaimed the bedroom. You opened the windows. You drank your tea slowly, without urgency. You said no without apology. You chose yourself, even when it was quiet, even when no one clapped for you. And that choice saved you. Evelyn, you are not a relic. You are not the wallpaper. You are the frame. I stopped there. I didn't sign it. I didn't need to. Folded the letter, pressed it between the pages of my journal, and closed it softly. Later that week, I took out a second sheet of paper. This one was for Daniel. I didn't plan to send it, but the words had been building inside me, and I wanted them out where I could see them. Not for revenge, just for truth. I wrote, "You were raised by a woman who never needed applause to do the right thing, and maybe that made you think she didn't need anything at all. You walked through a house of her making and mistook her silence for approval. You built your comforts on her shoulders and forgot to ask if she was tired. I forgave that part, even if I never said it. But when you used my name, when you signed away a piece of my life without permission, you didn't just cross a line. You confirmed something I had feared for years, that I had become a function to you, not a person. That was when I stopped waiting to be chosen, and I chose myself. I hope you're learning now. I hope the quiet has taught you what my presence once obscured, that love without respect is not love at all. I will always be your mother, but I am no longer your shelter." When I finished, I folded that one too, placed it in an envelope, and tucked it into the drawer beside the letter to myself. Didn't need to be mailed, just written, just acknowledged. There's a certain holiness in putting things into words. A way the body exhales when the truth finally lands in ink. After the letters, I felt lighter. Like a page had been turned, not in a book, but in the season of my life. I didn't cry. But I did sit by the window longer that evening, watching the light slip across the floorboards, thinking about how many years I had spent trying to be needed, and how few I had spent simply being. I thought of Harold. How he used to write little notes on napkins and hide them in my coat pockets. "You're the glue," one said. I found it once while walking to the post office in '89. It made me laugh out loud in the street. He knew what I was. I wasn't the background. I was the structure. That night, I made a small fire in the fireplace, not for warmth, just for ritual. I brought the third letter with me, the one I hadn't written yet, the one to the girl I used to be. And I started. You will be tempted to shrink, okay? You will be praised for how much you give, but forgotten when you ask for something back. Remember that? You will raise people who don't understand your worth until your absence teaches them. You will be tired. You will be kind anyway. But when the moment comes when you are sitting in the guest room of your own home, wondering where you went, come back to yourself. Take up space again and don't apologize. I read the letter aloud just once. Then I fed it to the fire. The flames licked it gently, curling the paper inward like a closing hand. No smoke alarm sounded. No one ran in asking if something was wrong, because no one else needed to understand what that letter meant. Only me. It didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a blessing. A quiet goodbye, not to my family, not even to the past, but to the version of me who thought she had to stay. Small to be loved, she's gone now, and I'm still here, standing taller, speaking less, but saying more. These days, the mornings are still and slow. I wake with a light, not an alarm. No footsteps overhead. No doors closing with hurried hands. Just the gentle rhythm of my own breath and the creak of the floorboard near the closet that's always greeted me like an old friend. I sit on the edge of my bed for a few minutes, wrapping my robe around me, grounding myself. There is no rush anymore. Nothing to anticipate but the gentle rituals I've chosen. The house hums differently now. The silence is not empty, it's full of intention. I move through the rooms with ease, as if they've reshaped themselves to hold only what brings peace. No more clutter. No more things I kept out of guilt or habit. I kept what mattered. I let the rest go. In the kitchen, I brew my coffee slowly. I still use the French press. Takes longer, but there's something soothing in the process. I sit at the table that's finally mine again, set near the window where the morning sun hits just right. I read the paper. It's not always the front page, sometimes just the comics or the gardening column. I don't read for urgency anymore. I read for joy. The garden has started blooming again. This year I planted more lavender and marigolds. Something about their sturdiness, their quiet confidence in harsh weather, it speaks to me now. I spend hours out there some days, with my hands in the dirt and the sun on my back. It reminds me of when Harold and I first bought this place. Before. Children, before grief, before the long, slow forgetting. I've begun to take photos of the things I love. Not to post them. I still don't care much for the online world, but to document my life for myself. My teacup by the window. A bird's shadow on the fence. A single tomato ripening just so. These small, almost invisible things that make up the soft texture of a good day. I write more now, too, in my journal. On note cards, I never send. Sometimes I write poems, just a few lines. I don't need anyone else to read them. The act is the reward. There's no schedule. No one asking what's for dinner. No unexpected guests crowding the hallway. No feeling of being watched but unseen. Sometimes I sit on the porch in the evening and listen to the wind move through the trees. That's all. No background music. No conversation. Just the natural music of solitude. People stop by occasionally. Linda from down the street. The mailman, who now knows to wave before leaving a package. Even the pastor from the old church came by last month. He asked if I'd like to return to Sunday service. Told him gently that I was worshiping in different ways now. In silence. In soil. In the soft art of being present with myself. Children haven't visited. Not yet. A few cards have come in the mail, thank yous, updates, polite expressions of thoughtfulness. I place them on the mantle for a few days, then tuck them away in a drawer. All right. I read them once, sometimes twice. That's enough. They've learned something, I think. Maybe not everything, maybe not in the way I once hoped. But life has its own quiet lessons, and I know now that some truths take time to reach the heart. I'm not waiting for them. I'm not angry. Simply release the grip I once had on the idea that I had to be needed to be loved. Because I am loved. By the version of me I've fought to reclaim. By the peace that has replaced resentment. By the home that once held too many shadows and now holds only light. There's a bench I've placed beneath the oak tree out back. Harold planted that tree in 1986. I remember because we argued about how far the roots would spread. He said it needed room. He was right. That tree has outgrown everything around it, including the fence, including us. I sit on that bench most evenings now. I bring a cup of tea and sometimes a book I never quite finish. The sun sets slow out here. It waits. Sometimes I think about the version of myself that accepted crumbs. It's a woman who made herself so small. She nearly disappeared. I don't hate her. I don't blame her. She did what she thought she had to do to keep the house together, to hold the roof in place with her quiet devotion. But I don't miss her. I thank her, and I let her rest. Now, I fill my days with intention, not obligation. I eat when I'm hungry. I rest when I'm tired. I don't rush through life anymore. I let it unfold at its own pace. When the grandchildren are old enough, maybe they'll come back. Maybe they'll want to sit with me under the tree, ask questions, hear stories that were never told. If they do, I'll be here. But I won't shape myself around their comfort again. I'll offer what I have and let it be enough. Because I've learned something I wish I had known sooner. You do not have to be indispensable to be worthy. You do not have to be erased to keep the peace. You are allowed to take up space in the home you built, in the life you chose. I am still here, whole, healing, unfolding. I walk through my days with a soft pride now, the kind that doesn't need validation. I am no longer the guest in my home. I am not waiting to be asked if I belong. I belong because I said so. And no one can take that from me again. My life is quiet now, and that's enough. I wasn't angry. I was finally empty, and that was beautiful. There's a peculiar clarity that comes after silence. It's a kind of truth that doesn't need to be shouted. To be understood, that's what I live in now. Not peace that was given to me, but peace I earned and kept, and refused to compromise again. It's been just over a year since the house became mine again. Not legally, I suppose. It was always mine on paper. But emotionally, spiritually, that took longer. And it came not from anyone else giving it back, but from me reaching for it. Not with bitterness, but with calm insistence. Sometimes I think about the road that brought me here, not with regret, but with awe at how long it was, how quiet, how I walked most of it without realizing I was moving at all. When you're raising people, holding up the ceiling of a house with nothing but your own resolve, it's easy to miss the distance you've traveled. You look up one day and realize your hands are tired, your back is bent, and your voice has gone thin from disuse. But you're still standing. You're still here. I still see them from time to time. Not often, and never unannounced. There are boundaries now. They arrive by appointment, and when they do, they knock, and they wait, and they ask to enter. And if I say no, if I'm not feeling up to company, or the house isn't in the kind of order I prefer, they accept that. Or at least, they try to. It's not punishment. It's re-education for them. For me, Daniel comes alone most times. He doesn't talk much about what happened, and I don't press him. He brings flowers occasionally. Once he brought a small wind chime he thought I'd like. Was loud and sharp. The kind you hang on a porch to make a statement. I thanked him, then tucked it away in the hall closet. Later that week, I bought one for myself, a soft-toned, weathered brass one that barely murmurs when the wind moves. That's more my pace now. Gentle, intentional. True, the children wrote me letters. Over the summer, their handwriting still wobbly, still full of heart. One of them asked what my favorite color was. I smiled when I read it. Not because of the question, but because they were finally trying to see me. I responded slowly, carefully. I didn't pour myself back into their lives like I might have once. I offered pieces. Hints. I let them meet the version of me I had rebuilt. Not the version that made herself small for comfort, but the one who wore solitude like a second skin. There is love still. That hasn't disappeared. But it has changed. Its shape. They used to need me in a way that cost me. Okay? Now they respect me in a way that feeds me. Or they're learning to. Okay? And that's enough. Learn the power of small rituals. Each day begins with a choice. Not what to do, but how to be. And I choose slowness, stillness, softness, without surrender. I've started teaching myself new things. It's nothing grand, just quiet expansions. I took a free online course in botanical. Drawing? I'm not very good, but I like the way the pencil feels in my hand again. I've started writing short essays. Not for anyone to publish. Just for me. Reflections, truths, things I never gave myself permission to say out loud. One of them is titled What I Know Now. And in it, I wrote this. What I know now is that giving and disappearing are not the same thing. What I know now is that silence can be healing, but only if it's your own. What I know now is that the people who love you should not require you to vanish to feel held. What I know now is that home is not a place you give away to be loved. It's a place you build and protect and fill with the kind of light you do. Not apologize for. I reread that paragraph more than once. Still do. Sometimes people ask if I get lonely. I understand the question. From the outside, a woman alone in a house she once shared, walking by herself, tending to flowers, might look like she's lost something. But I haven't lost. I've reclaimed. Loneliness comes when you are surrounded by people who do not see you. Solitude, though, that's different. That's a choice. That's a state of grace. And grace is what I move in now. There are afternoons when I bake. Not for anyone. It's just because the smell of cinnamon and vanilla makes the house feel warm. Sit with a slice of cake and a cup of coffee and remember who I used to be, the girl who dreamed of a quiet life, who wanted nothing more than to make a home filled with care. I did that for many years, and I forgot myself in the process. But I found her again, that girl. She's older now, wiser, a little more particular, a little less forgiving of erasure. But still warm, still willing to love, just not at the cost of herself. If I could go back, maybe I would change some things. Maybe I would speak up sooner. Maybe I would not hand over keys so easily. Maybe I would hold my space tighter from the start, but maybe not. Because every part of this story, even the quiet betrayals, even the long silences, even the guest room I was told to be grateful for, taught me something essential. It taught me how to come home to myself.
Okay.
And that is the greatest return. Now, the rooms know my name again.
Okay.
The walls echo only with the sounds I choose. And when I walk down the hallway at night, there are no closed doors that make me feel unwanted. Just a house that breathes with me. That shelters me. That reflects me. I light candles in the evening. I sit under the oak tree. I drink tea that no one forgets to make for me because I make it for myself. And I write, and I breathe, and I live, not loudly, but fully. What I know now is this. Love that asks you to vanish is not love. Home that cannot hold your whole self is not home. And a life that silences you is not a life meant to be kept. I know now that I am allowed to exist. And that all by itself is everything.